Chambar has served about 1.6 million meals over the past 15 years it's been in business. Karri co-founded the restaurant when she was only 31 years old and built it into a great success, even in an industry where profits can be razor thin. Then came the pandemic. And like so many Canadians, Karri has been fighting for the survival of her business. Karri, welcome again. Tell us about your business and how the pandemic has come home to you, and how do you see it reopening? How do you see things reopening?
Thank you for having me, Linda. It's a pleasure to be here. Reopening is going to be strange for everyone. I think it's hard to, when people go to restaurants, it's generally for the energy of all the people. And now there's this space. And I think there's a primal aversion to going into empty restaurants. I mean, if a restaurant's busy, generally it's good. So when restaurants aren't going to look busy, like there's all these visceral reactions that I think that we're going to have to deal with. That is the initial feeling of that, and also for how long people have been in isolation and just having to be in spaces again. There's going to be this friction or strange experience for people of it's the world is not as we know it. And how long that will be, we don't know. Like it's up to public perception and the information that people are basing their decisions on.
Yeah, it's what a strange time, huh? It has been, and we really don't know what's coming. But can you talk a little bit, Karri? Can you tell us a little bit more about, like, just take us back to when the pandemic hit, and how many employees do you have, and how has it affected your life and your business?
Yeah, I mean, it started before it hit. I think it was this morbid fascination I had of thinking, oh, I wonder if this could actually come here. And started really looking at what was happening and how the virus worked. And there was all these amazing infographics, which I'm always fascinated by and love looking at. And so then just went, okay, what if it does? And what would happen, and what would happen in what order? And then the reality of that was like, wow, we're done. Like I started doing financial modeling and really looking at what it would mean for us for this to happen here. And then as it started to come closer, I'd reached out to the landlord and said, I don't know if this will happen, but if it does, this is what it's going to mean for us. And so we're going to do whatever we can to survive. But when I looked at the financials, that it wasn't survival. And then it hit really quickly. And it was almost amazing to watch the way that people knew it was coming and just couldn't react. Like this, people at the beach that walk out when the tsunami's coming instead of running. Like it felt like that. and also the having to face that actually you don't realize what you've got till it's gone kind of feeling of, and then letting go of that attachment, but also the practical side of, okay, this knowing, I mean, having survived the 2008 economic crash and not moving fast enough, of kind of wondering what was happening day to day, it was like we knew what to do. You just rip the Band-Aid and you do it. And
well, Karri, tell us how many employees did you have, and what did you do on a practical day-to-day level once the pandemic really hit home in Canada?
Yeah, as soon as the Whistler closed, we knew we had a couple days. So we laid everybody off. We had just under 150 staff, and there's 7 of us. And our kids work for us now. How to unschool and do some work ethic, because homeschooling has been a total failure. but it was really like we had to shut down and just cut costs everywhere, like pause contracts, stop just everything, and personally as well, you know, defer mortgages and just go, how do we go bare bones as fast as we can? So within 48 hours, we just
Wow.
go on to basic, like, is the gas on? And then we really moved fast. Nico had been doing some work about exploring meals for home. So he was already into that, of understanding what that would take. And so basically within a week, we turned into a commissary kitchen. And then out of that, we had all this food, like, you know, you have $90,000 worth of inventory. We have a pretty good size menu. And we're like, we can't let this food go to waste. So we started making it into meals and taking it into the downtown east side, and got in touch with volunteers, and then just realized what was happening down there. A lot with seniors that needed to stay in place, that were in the single room occupancies, which brought about the Food Coalition, where we gathered restaurants together and had this overwhelming generosity of putting it out to our database to say, we're doing these meals, like, does anybody want to contribute? But
Karri,
also,
can I interrupt you for a moment and ask you to just tell us more about that coalition and who's in it and what it's for, and is that part of your vision for the future?
yeah, well, there was this moment of realizing that one of our suppliers came to us. So we're making meals for the downtown east side to move this food, and then had a supplier call us, and he was like, I'm going to go under. We have all of this product that's destined for conferences that have been canceled. So we captured it. I went to my landlord and just said, can we defer our rent and use that money to buy that food and turn it into meals, and froze it. We have a really good sized freezer. It's like the size of a small apartment. And then started putting it on to another one of our suppliers, Legends Hall, pivoted and started doing home delivery. So we were able to get these frozen meals that were kind of our signature dishes into homes, and also on SPUD, home delivery, which took forever to get on. But so that was the pivot around that. But the Food Coalition, it was really seeing that there were so many of our local farmers and producers that only supplied to restaurants, and like foragers that only supply to us. So we have
foragers. There's actually a thing, like, really foragers out there.
We have a forager that we buy everything from him, and if we don't have, you know, a dish that can go on, then what happens to him? And so we're his sole income. And realizing a lot of the work I've been doing over the past couple of years is around regional sustainability, and really understanding. I grew up on a farm and around food systems and composting, and so having an understanding of that, but seeing, like, we have, if this got worse and the borders closed, we have a major food security issue. Like, we don't actually have enough food regionally. And
you know, we were talking before you know, last week, as I knew you were coming on to talk with us today, and you were telling me about some stuff that I had not heard about, and that I found really kind of shocking about farming in BC and what's happening with the cannabis industry. Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, our local food systems have been pretty decimated. I mean, mostly from development of, you know, how do we hold on to this agricultural land? And it's really hard for farmers to make a go, and also to be able to have financing, like credit unions that can do the long-term agriculture lending. But that cannabis came in, and cannabis took over all the majority of greenhouses for all of our beautiful food and local flowers gone, because the cannabis came in and has taken over the greenhouses. So, I mean, if you own the land, or those are your greenhouses, and someone comes and offers you that you're going to make the same amount of money, you don't have to do anything, and they'll take your workers, and why wouldn't you?
So what has that meant for the food supply in, I always thought of Chambar, and I also, as soon as we get through this question, I'd really like you to take a moment to kind of just describe for us, I can help, what Chambar was like, you know, in February before all this happened. how vibrant it was, how rich, how amazing the food was. But I always thought of Chambar as a place where it was locally sourced.
Yeah, and it's been harder and harder. Like we were able to commit in the past to using local food. And Nico grew up in Europe where you have a calendar. Which
Nico was your chef, is your
Nico's
ex-husband, and he was your chef.
Yeah. So, you know, he grew up in fine dining, like Michelin star restaurants where everything's local and everything's seasonal. And there's such a strong commitment that as the seasons change, you're constantly changing your food to be able to do that. So he was really committed to that. It became harder when we moved to the new location, which was really an unforeseen, just because of the volume. So we were having to go to farmers in Pemberton and say, okay, we need a group of you to grow fingerling potatoes, so we'll have that quantity for the next 3 weeks. But in probably the last 7 years, especially, there's been some significant events that have changed the landscape of food. Like one of them was the ethanol. So everyone was switching to growing corn for ethanol, with not food. So it was about a 400% increase in baked goods, like for baking goods for restaurants. So
400% increase in the cost,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and because of people were growing for ethanol instead of for food. Mm-hmm. And then the other, like from a meat perspective, the Canadian government, for whatever reason, opened up, increased the volume of beef that could go to China by 30%. Now, of course, they're willing to pay more. So I don't know if you remember this, but it was around 3 years ago. And almost overnight, steaks went from 28, 35-ish to 40 to 55. Like it just jumped. So we scrambled and tried to go single source where we would use all the different cuts of an animal and deal with one ranch, and it just became almost impossible. And there was a bit of correction, but really we pay for that. The consumer pays, and all the A beef goes to China. And so we pay more for a lesser quality beef now because of that. So there's all these things that we don't hear about or that don't get talked about. And there has been a real squeeze because there's too many middlemen in the transportation and logistics and wheat boards and all of these in between in the food systems.
So the middlemen, can you just explain that?
Like
who are they and why? What do they do?
We've moved so far away from local that there's so much contract consolidated farming that's happening. So really industrial farming.
What does that mean, contract consolidated farming?
So for instance, if you have wheat, if you grow wheat on a farm, instead of so there's big companies in the States where they have huge teams of combines that just move around and huge amounts. And so when you're getting into the move to more industrial food, when you're consolidating farming, you're taking multiple farms and consolidating the operations and having these teams move in and contract it. The issue is
that's happening in Canada as well.
Yeah, a little bit, not as much as the States though. I mean, the family farm is hanging on by a thread, but not by much. I mean, a lot of people that's the margins is like when you're at 1 or 2% profits, like, people my age or younger, why?
Of course.
So then you have contract buying of food. Then you also have, the wheat board that is you're contracted for a certain price and then the price goes up, but you can't take advantage of that. So there's this kind of market manipulation that's happening.
So back to Chambar, can you just describe walking in there one day, in January or February, and what it felt like and what you saw and, what your world was like then? And then I want to move on to talk with you more about the reopening question.
I mean, we're like the bustling, like the word Chambar means when the teacher leaves the room and all the kids go crazy. It's like this old French phrase, like Chambar, like this raucous kind of
Huh.
harmless fun that's chaos. And that was our whole concept, was to make fine dining fun and a bit more louder and rebellious. And so we've it was busy, like, you know, there we have a great clientele. We have a really diverse clientele, which I love. That you have, you know, 9-year-olds in sequins coming in for the opera and 19-year-olds drinking cocktails all in the same, you know, couple tables from each other. So I love the diversity of people that are in there, but it's just there's a buzz and it's busy and people are close together and people meet each other and have dates and memories and celebrations. Like, it's a gathering place. And it's like, it's strange that here we go into this reopening and we're not allowed to gather.
Well, let's talk some about what reopening is going to look like. And then I'd like to hear your ideas. I know you have some about personal responsibility of people who are coming to restaurants. So what is there a Chambar of the future?
Well, we've made it through that we can open. So
congratulations. That's really a big deal. Congratulations.
So yeah, it's been a crazy time. The main part is, like, you know, getting the support that we needed, which has kind of come in just in time, because it's
is that government support or investor?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's really interesting to be on a front line of something and how different the press story is compared to actually what's happening. That's been fascinating.
That is fascinating. Tell us.
And I'm like, actually, there's just this rush to get the story first than to get the actual truth and the details. And I'm
That's an interesting critique of journalism, of my industry. Yeah. So if we go deeper, like, tell us, like, what are the government programs that have been effective? Are they coming from British Columbia? Are they coming from the federal government? What's been helping?
So the first assistance was the announcement of the 75% wage subsidy, which for restaurants, they could only actually apply for that on April 27th. And we were told it's going to be a 4 to 6 week wait. Mm. So what restaurants need is cash to open. And so as you're bleeding out during this time, because takeout's not enough, and unless you're innovating and have somehow come up with something else, for full service independent restaurants, most of them just close the doors or they're dripping along doing takeout, but they've taken a considerable hit with cash flow. So if you didn't have access to cash, you've either closed the doors or you will be June 1st. And then the next one was rent. Like, if you have no revenue, how do you survive? Like, as an example, we had our revenue went down by 93%. And
that's very dramatic.
And our rent is $38,000.
Oh, wow. Is that just on Chambar? You also had the Dirty Apron and Medina, right?
Yeah, not anymore. We co-founded Medina and the Dirty Apron, but both Dave and Sarah, who have the Dirty Apron, took that on, and Robbie too.
Yeah.
So we're like, it is actually not possible to pay rent. So some landlords were like, no, you have to, which gave restaurants really no choice but to close the doors.
Yeah.
Or some restaurants deferred. The danger in that being is you can't front load the debt onto restaurants, because otherwise, like, when you look at the financials, where they actually get hit is next January to April. That's where the hole opens and gets bigger. And then the announcement finally came through from the federal government to say we're going to get the 75% rent assistance, but with no details. So it actually wasn't until yesterday, the day before, that we got yes, like, is it gross rent? Is it basic rent? How is it going to work? And the landlords didn't know either. They couldn't apply. They had nowhere. It still hasn't opened yet, that portal for them to apply to, where the landlords pay 25%, we pay 25%, and then there's a forgivable federal loan for the 50%, that it will be sorted out between municipal property tax and however that's going to work.
So if I hear you right, you're saying that all of this aid came just in time for you to survive, for your business to survive, but not in time for a number of other restaurants to survive. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it was estimated, and I think it was Restaurants Canada that put it out. I'm not sure on that 30% of Canadian restaurants closed in May 1st.
Yeah.
And then there was this like, it'll be, if restaurants don't get the support, it will be 70% will be closed by June 1st. So the urgency in getting that rent support was the key priority. Like that's what's going to bridge the restaurants through. And they need to know, and they have to have landlords that are willing to not kick them out if they have to wait for that money. The other thing that I don't think the public understands is the amount of money it takes to open up a restaurant.
How much?
Like for us, it's $140,000 to open the doors. You've got to inventory, food, like
you got to be ready.
Supplies, you've got to have everything ready. And that's a lot of, so you get to this point where you're like, okay, I have this much money and I need this much to open. So at some point you just have to close, or you can never reopen because you need that amount of money to open the doors. It's not like you can say, well, I'll just open the door for 50 people and then I only need 3 staff. It just doesn't work like that. Like to run a kitchen, you need 10 to 12 people. You need bartenders and hosts and servers and server assistants. And depending on the style of your restaurant, you need more staff to offer that service. So it's not, you have to have the cash to open. So if restaurants don't have that cash, they can't open. And the other issue that we had with the province, as soon as the province announced, I think this was a few weeks ago, restaurants can open, our takeout sales just dove because the public is like, oh, restaurants are going to be able to open, they're fine. So it was a huge hit for restaurants to not have, to get hit with that takeout, because as soon as people think they're okay, they're really supporting us and ordering the takeout to keep us alive because they want us to be there after. Like our existence is in all gratitude to our customers, which is it's beautiful. And we're so grateful. At the end of the day, that's why we exist. That's your compliment, is the people in your restaurant.
Karri, I've always heard that the restaurant business is one of the most white-knuckling businesses out there, that, it has so many potential ups and downs, and so many restaurants fail, I think in Vancouver particularly, where we have such high rents, and, it's hard to have a small, local restaurant. So congratulations for getting through it and, being where you are right now. I wanted to ask you, though, about, in the summer, we're coming into the summer, and a lot of students in Canada look for part-time work and get work in restaurants. And we just did an article recently about youth unemployment rates that showed that there were 500,000 unemployed people between 15 and 24 years old who normally would have jobs. And roughly 260,000 of those losses were in part-time employment. So can you just talk about that, how that is, how you see that, the impact of that, and how we might move forward out of that?
Yeah, that's good. That's not a pretty picture. Even for us, there's no way we can open during the day. We simply can't afford the labor and the food costs and the risk, because there's a very high risk that we could get shut down again if there was an outbreak. And so for us to inventory up for a full day and night of service, we actually can't take that risk. So we can only open in the evening. We'll open for brunch on the weekends.
But you used to be open pretty much all day long.
Yeah,
like you could come in and get breakfast.
8 a.m. till sometimes 2 a.m. So that's a lot of staff that there's way more staff in the night. But now we also have, you know, your averages for a service restaurant is like one server for 20 people. This is kind of your average of the number of people that, so if all of a sudden our capacity is half, then there's half the, you know, you have your base staff, but there's a significant difference in the service staff that you have on. So not only do we have a decrease in the operations, that we don't have daytime, we don't know if we'll ever be able to open in the day. And then if we have evening service at half the capacity, you know, there's at least half of the staff, most likely more. And we know what we support. We support the creative economy. We support, like, how do people become actors and photographers and, you know, in theater, like there's so much that is supported.
You mean they're the waiter, they're the service industry.
Yeah, bartenders.
Workers.
I mean, if you ask actors how many of them worked in restaurants, I mean, where restaurants provide a transition that you can go into a profession and you can make good money in less hours and still have the energy and the time to do your passion, to be an artist, to act, to do, and you have flexibility. So for single moms, for like, there's a lot of single parents that are in the restaurant industry because it gives them the flexibility of time.
Yeah. So that brings me to what's going to be my last question and then we're going to take questions from the participants on the call. I just want to get you to talk a little bit more about your vision for reopening and your hopes and your fears around that. You know, like we still have a pandemic going on in the world. You know, we hope that that everything's going to be fine, but we really, you know, we know that we're always going to be susceptible to that one person who actually has it. So what's that like for you in reopening, your thoughts about reopening the restaurant?
Yeah, it's been a really strange contemplation, and also to the point of wondering personally, like, should restaurants even exist? Like, are we a good contribution? Do restaurants need to exist anymore? And I'm like, what is it why are we here? Like, why did this happen? Why have we shut down? And really the answer for this and the majority of problems in the world is we're not willing to take personal responsibility for our choices and our actions and the consequences of those things on others. We don't think far ahead. It's like, even for myself, when the restaurant, we're like, it's not going to happen, I thought about everything I was going to lose. And then you realize, oh, there's the collective grief of what's happening in the world and the abuse and the overwhelm of that. But really, in order for a restaurant to exist in this time, we need a trusted space. And what does it take to trust? And really, the relationships that we have and all the people that we trust, I would say most of them are people that we've shared a meal with around a table. So how do we create a space where people that can still exist? How do you have strangers come into a restaurant that actually want that experience and want to be with the people that they care about and love or do business with? It's really, in a restaurant is where relationships are formed. And we're humans and we want human connection. And so in us taking full responsibility for the safety of our employees, ourselves, our children, I mean, there's one side where there's the opinion of like, oh, it's, you know, conspiracy and it's not, it's going to be, we're going to realize this was so ridiculous and we overreacted and it's a big scam by pharma or whatever. So you have those people in society, and their level of risk aversion is completely different from people that are really terrified just to go outside right now. And so how do we have a space where you have those people come together? And it's really about representation. Like, how do you bring people together around tables where you have all of those perspectives and people are in the same space together? And
how do you? Tell us.
I mean, the only thing that I could think of was like, actually, if we're going to take this level of responsibility and we'll do the gold standard, but actually there's only so much we can do. And we just have to be really honest. When I look at what the ethics of our business are, and about honesty and respect and what those are, in order for me to uphold those values and really take responsibility, if I'm going to take responsibility and show leadership in this, then I also have to take responsibility for the staff and for the people coming into the space. And what do we need to do that? We actually have to ask the people coming in to also take that level of responsibility. That they need to be able to state and say, no, I haven't been exposed and I haven't had any of these symptoms. And yes, I'm willing to get a temperature check, so that everyone in that room knows that everyone else has signed that agreement, that it's almost like a social agreement of saying, I appreciate being in this space and I would like to be in a restaurant. And the only way for me to be there is to be a good human, essentially, and be considerate of others and not start social shaming, and just be really considerate that people have very different perspectives and visceral reactions to being out in public in this new time.
Yeah, and so like in Wuhan, I've been reading that, you know, before you can go in anywhere, you get a temperature check now. But as you were talking, I'm just thinking about, you know, the difficulty of doing that on top of, you know, young people who are drinking a lot and, you know, the problems that could arise there. And so I'm just wondering, like, oh my God, are you going to become enforcers? Are you going to, you know, all this, is the role of a server going to be more in the future of a caretaker of society?
I think it's about why do we have stupid rules? You know, why can't we drink at the beach? I mean, we essentially make rules for assholes. excuse my language, but we do. We have all of these stupid rules because people are like ignorant of, and not considerate of other people around them, and they just don't care. And I'm saying, just hold. Like, usually we're the first to have a party and stay home for late and bend the rules a bit. Like, that's what Chambar is about. But actually in this time, we're saying, no, if we want to be here, we actually have to be good.
Okay, Karri, is there anything else you want to say about that social contract before we move on?
Just that like in this moment in time, as much as we'd like to be rebellious, that we actually have to be really responsible and think about what it is we want now, and that how much our decisions are the energy that creates the future we want. And we know, and we do things anyway. I'm as guilty as any, but unless we really step up, you know, whether it's climate change or like we know what we need to do. And for the sake of convenience, for all of these other reasons, we don't. And it's like in this moment in time, we have to step up and take responsibility for ourselves and just really be considerate and think further out of what true cost is.
Okay, thank you. So we have a few questions. This one's from Brian Schell. Is there a formula used in the industry to determine the number of diners required to make money? Or does it vary depending on the nature of the restaurant? What is your estimation at your own restaurant? Can you manage if you have only 50% of the diners you had, and he calls it PC, pre-COVID? That's probably going to become a thing pretty quickly, yeah, because regulations may limit your clientele to 50%, distancing, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully that's changing. For an independent restaurant, it's like really standard, and I'm speaking to full service restaurants. Unless you're a chain and you're doing like your contract buying food, like most chain restaurants have, because they have buying power, and they're, you know, commissary kitchens and all kinds of other, your profit margins are 10 to 15%, sometimes 20% more than independent restaurants. So if you choose to buy local, if you choose, I mean, and also you don't have that level of buying power. We modeled out, we asked, a group of us got together and asked a bunch of restaurants from around BC to fill out financials. And it was really consistent that you need 70% occupancy of your space in order to survive. So the push for the 50% was a recommendation that came from the BC Restaurant Association Task Force, which I'm on. And we voiced to say, this will be great for chains who have the square footage, but it will be at the expense of independent restaurants. So if there is the ability to have space and you can do the distancing, then it shouldn't be about 50%, because otherwise you're guaranteeing the demise of independent restaurants. So what do we want here is the distance. So if an operation, which it's come back and said you need 2 meters between tables and 3 feet back to back between chairs. That's the distancing that's going to be required within restaurants. So if you think about how many 30 to 60, even 80 seat restaurants, depending on their configuration or how narrow they are, they actually can't do that. So the issue is, how do restaurants survive and continue on? If those subsidies don't continue, it's not possible for them to survive. And that is going to be a really hard personal choice for restaurants to figure out whether they are able to negotiate with landlords. Like some restaurants have said, there's no way we're going to open until April next year. Like especially restaurants that rely on tourism. If you're in Granville Island, how much tourism is going to be there? Like any restaurant that is reliant on tourism is getting hit really hard.
Karri, this is from Nora Weber. If you could have inner access to the Ministry of Agriculture, what would you recommend to strengthen the relationship between restaurants and farmers? Restaurant and farmers to increase the visibility of both sectors?
Communication. I mean, this is a lot of the regional work I'm doing around bringing together all the sectors and doing our like regional infrastructure master plan, which is like separate work outside of out of Chambar. But really what is required is collaboration, and centralized transportation and logistics would solve a lot of the issues. Because if you imagine farmers all over the province, even into Alberta, and where we get our food, it's how does each individual farmer get food to a restaurant? Like as an example, you see these waves of fads, like everybody has heirloom tomatoes on their menu. So then the farmers grow it, but there isn't communications with the restaurants to say, what should we grow? So it's a lack of communication, and it's a lack of efficiencies, and mostly because we don't have a regional transport, like centralized transportation logistics. That would help a lot.
Okay, and this is from Tessa Vikander. She says, I've never been able to afford Chambar, though I love what you do. Could a future alternative to large upscale restaurants such as Chambar be that we see more small, lower price restaurants? The local small restaurants near my house seem to be surviving so far. Is their model more sustainable through an economic downturn?
Yeah, there's a few like neighborhood corner store type places who have stayed open, and they've been managed to move people through. So, and in Seattle, when I was, because they got hit first, so I was in really close communication to see what was happening down there, and then little neighborhood places actually did okay. Like they didn't get hit as hard. They had about a 60% decrease rather than, a 90%. So I would say yes and no, because actually what restaurants are realizing is what are we doing by participating in this race to the bottom pricing? Who pays? Like when we're 80% of our seafood we buy from Asia. Why? Because they have slave labor compared to us. And why our fishermen don't even know if they should go fish, because they don't know if there's anybody will be able to buy it, let alone will pay the price. So we're not paying true cost for our food. And a lot of it has to do with migrant labor. Like there's a lot of there's a lot of things that will come to light about the restaurant industry and how and what the ethics are around food. And I think we pay for it in health, we pay for it in so many other ways. And I'm excited about the conversations that will come, you know, post-COVID about real cost.
Okay. Thank you. Is there an ethical issue employing people so they earn just under $1,000 per month to ensure that they continue to receive the CERB, in effect ensuring staff continuity for a period of time? What's going to happen to wages at your restaurant when CRB ends?
Well, our wages are essentially a percent of your sales. So if you can, and this is the issue with being like how many people we need to have enough revenue to pay our fixed costs, including our labor. So generally labor is a percentage of sales. So having the subsidy, if it exists while we don't have enough revenue because we can't open at more than 50%, that's where it's bridging and helping through. And so we're able to bring back and have more staff potentially work less days so they can continue to get the $2,000 a month, but they can't earn more than $1,000. So how do we look after more people to get through this time to the point where we get busy enough? So it's really a logistical issue of being able to, and so I'm not sure if the question is it ethical to have people essentially getting welfare? Like is it a perspective that that's what it is? Or is it that it's a leg up of helping that, you know, maybe we're more socialist than we actually thought we were. But it's like we can't actually survive. And I think there's also, we have let's not overwhelm the healthcare system as one curve, but we have economic collapse being the other curve we're trying to avoid. So if restaurants go down, the florists, the bookkeepers, the accountants, the valets, the landscaping, like it just goes on and on, the ripple effect of the number of, I think there's like 27 other sectors that somehow, the farmers, like what else goes down with that? And so it's much easier to prop up and for us to be, you know, it's a lot of extra work to be able to mull it out and plan around that. But that may be what gets us by. I don't know if I answered the question around the ethical side.
Okay, well, moving on to Leona Cola's question. In a study on super spreaders in 28 countries, one example showed how the air conditioning in the restaurant contributed to which people contracted the coronavirus. Are you aware, and how do you plan to respond?
So we have air conditioning. We're opening at a time when we can have all the doors open, and that we have a patio, which a lot of restaurants don't have that. We've looked into extra filtering, like filtration, to see, but it actually is a risk. And so can we control that? No. Can we promise that the air is safe? Or how many instances have there been? So when we're doing all of our plans, we're talking to doctors and we're asking them, like, what is the real risk? Because actually we're not going to promise something that we can't guarantee. And so if people feel that that's a risk that is too high for them to come into a restaurant, that's okay. It's okay. And I think we'll get to a point where we go, I have this fear of this, and that means I'm not going to go to a restaurant. And then we may move to a point where you're like, well, I'm missing out on all the fun, and I want to go out to a restaurant and be with my friends and have that experience. And I will face that fear, and I'm willing to take on that risk. And that's a very personal choice for people. And we have to be honest.
Karri, I think when, we were talking about these things offline, what I was wondering about after we talked is the legal, do you feel like there's going to be more legal risk for restaurants?
Yeah, obviously I'm, talking to lawyers and trying to figure all this out, because you get terrified of the US model for sue for anything. And, at some point you have to it's going back to my first point, like, we take a risk walking out the door every day, and our routines and our way of life, we have this perception that we're in control all the time, and we're actually not. So, you know, here we are, we don't actually have control. What are we scared of? Death. I mean, it's inevitable anyway. It's going to happen. So at what point do we participate in life knowing the risks, and we participate? Sorry.
Sorry. I think I hear one of your kids. Do you need to take a moment to answer?
No, it's okay.
Okay.
They know that if I'm on Zoom calls, they can come ask me for things that I'll say yes to, just to make them go away.
That's funny. Karri, you know, when I'm just going to insert another question here. When I first met you, it was years ago. It was probably 14 years ago. And I came and I talked with you. I interviewed you. And I remember how much you were focused on creating a low carbon restaurant. So tell us, how is this situation going to affect the efforts of restaurants to lower their carbon footprints? And what is this? What's the tie-in here to climate?
I think it's the people are in this moment, you know, whether people are frantic and working 18-hour days, or if they have this time to just stop and think. Like, I think, you know, somebody that said, it's like Mother Earth said, you trash the place, go to your room. There's a bit of that maybe where we consider, but it's like, what do we want? Like, what do we actually want? How do we want our world to be? Like, if we value humans so much, then we also have to value the planet we live on. And if the choices that we make, and so for us, our personal choices and our personal values, for us to uphold those in the restaurant and personally, that's our choice. And we can ask that we hope to attract people that have shared values into our restaurant that also support that. And so if we stick to our values, then the cost will be what the cost will be to do that, to buy local. And is that an equality issue? Yes, because we would love it. We remember what it's like when we couldn't afford to go to a fine dining restaurant. And that's half of the reason we started Chambar, because we were like, why can't you go out and enjoy beautiful fine dining food? But also that we didn't want to be in this like pretentious, stuffy, elitist atmosphere. So how could we create that? But the reality is the food costs are going up and up, and the margins are going down and down. And is there a future for restaurants? Maybe not.
Well, okay. We should really end on that note, but we have a couple more questions. Ken Corey says, I love your bookshelf. I think the future of restaurants will blossom during the summer while outdoor service is easier. But going forward, people like us who like to come home to a restaurant after a night at the theater, for example, are going to have a difficult time during the winter months. Do you have any comment about that?
Yeah, my comment would be that and this was the original reason I reached out to you, because I was like, how do people inform themselves to make good decisions? Because right now people are making decisions based on visceral reactions they're having to fear. And so if fear is simply the unknown, how do we find out the truth? And we must inform ourselves. And I'm like, we need to be knowledgeable in order to make really good informed decisions. And, you know, you've put out some amazing, I love the integrity of the Vancouver Observer, and you're basically my only news source, so I don't spend all my time freaking out.
National Observer.
National Observer, sorry.
But yes.
That it's like, wisdom is our love of knowledge. And so if we want to make really good, wise decisions, then we need to inform ourselves based on good data, not visceral reactions and fear. So we're waiting for permission. We've just become so infantile, waiting to be told what to do rather than inform ourselves. So I could open tomorrow the restaurant because I'm good with that. And we can say, this is what we've done, and this is how we've informed ourselves, and these are all the safety standards, and this is why. And at a certain point, we can't control that there's a risk. And so if you're not willing to take that risk, that's okay. And if you are, what is that risk? And that's up for people to inform themselves on what is that risk and whether that ratio is okay for them. If we look at the number of deaths versus what the risk is versus, it's really low here. So what is the risk? I think it's about people need to find good, credible information to make their own informed personal decisions.
Thank you so much, Karri, for the shout out for National Observer. I really appreciate that. And Hazel Braithwaite asks, would it help small business in BC to require landlords to pay property tax? I believe it is unusual in Canada for tenants to pay property tax when the owner gets the capital gain.
I don't know that I can answer that question because it varies so differently depending on the municipality. Like for instance, the commercial property tax is like exorbitant compared to private. And we have as a commercial tenant, we have no vote on what that is. So no one gets to vote on commercial property tax. So the majority of rent, and a lot of the Vancouver rent is actually property tax. So should the landlord pay it? Well, it might not be viable to be a landlord. I think there is a lot of perception unfairly that, and some of it's probably deserved, but that landlords are all these greedy money making, and that's simply not true. So if we, again, look at the information and dissect how much of rent is what, yes, is the market high in Vancouver for what it should be? And is that why it's hard for independent business to survive? Absolutely. Why is it so high? Because our land values are much higher than they should be. And it's an affordability issue, and it's a simply supply-demand issue. Like there's more people that want to live in Vancouver and they're willing to pay for it. And that's probably going to get worse. I mean, it may go down, but I bet it gets worse, because if I was somewhere else in the world and I looked at where I'd want to be with climate change hitting, I'd want to be right here. So that's also kind of terrifying.
This is our last question, and it's from Nora Weber. Nora says, I think we need much larger conversations around the intersection between restaurants like yours, farmers, and community. Can you comment on how this increases community resilience, good economics, and environmental sustainability?
Absolutely. I would say the number one reason that we are where we are, and a lot of the problems, issues that we have, are because the metrics that we use to make decisions are not inclusive of social and environmental impact and equality. And if we make decisions just based on, like, how do we define prosperity? It's up to us to know what we value and say, this is what prosperity or abundance means to me. So if we're choosing to build a property or to do anything, if we're actually using the metrics, expanding our metrics in which we make those decisions, that will make a huge shift. And in resilience, in equality, like if the more inequality we have, the more we pay. Inequality costs us all. And so our focus around addressing those issues should be a priority. And they would be if that was part of the metrics that we made decisions by at every level.
So we do have one more question. This is the last of the last, and it's from Pat Carl. And Pat says, Karri, with less disposable money available, some of us may not be able to spend money on restaurants, even though we might want to support our favorite ones. Have you thought about what less personal disposable income may have on the impact of that on the restaurant industry?
I would say at the moment it's kind of on scale that why, even for myself, like, okay, I've worked for 15 years to get myself up and now I'm at ground zero again. So what is my ability to go out and, drink cocktails with my friends? Or there's a shrink back, and you think about what's really important to you. So do you need to go out to restaurants once a week? Or maybe you're having dinner parties in your backyard with your friends or around dinner tables. Like, we get more social. We get more intimate with the people that we really care about. And from a social perspective, from a business perspective, will there be as many people in my restaurant? Maybe not. And that's okay. I mean, if it means that we have in this moment of time, we have less seats, but we have better people, or that you can only go out for special occasions, then that's okay. I think it's you choose how you spend your money. So if you can afford, say, a certain amount of dollars per month to go out and eat, are you going to have 10 McDonald's meals, or are you going to enjoy your family at home around the dinner table and hang out with your friends and go to a restaurant once a month that you really value and love and appreciate that experience? And that's the choice that we make. Whatever choices we make will be what survives out of this. And I don't know that's up, that's for the people to decide.
Okay, Karri, thank you so much for your time. And we wish you the best of luck. And I know for myself, I can say I really look forward to seeing what you do in the future and to you opening your doors. And I look forward to, being there with you again. I hope that can all happen. And I really shout out to everyone on the call. I know we had a lot of people on this call today who are from the restaurant industry. And to all of you who are struggling and fighting the good fight, it is a good fight. And restaurants are like the arts. Eating out is, the soul of who we are. I mean, food, not eating out necessarily, but food is part of who we are. And eating out is a wonderful part of living an urban life. So kudos to all of you. Thank you for what you do. And I just want to say before we end, this is the National Observer. I am Linda Solomon Wood. I'm editor-in-chief of Canada's National Observer. And I really invite you to go look at our site. That's nationalobserver.com, those of you who don't know. And I just wanted you to know that we are able to do the journalism that we do, which helps to keep Canada informed, thanks to subscriptions from readers. So anybody who can, I would be so appreciative if you would go to the site and subscribe. So you can also sign up for our newsletter and get to know us before you make that decision. But hope to see you on our future calls. Next up is Matthew Purdy from the New York Times. He's deputy editor of the New York Times, and our topic will be reporting from the heart of the pandemic. Matthew manages 1,700 reporters and was head of investigations at the New York Times before that. So it's going to be a really interesting talk, and I hope you all will join us. Thank you again, Karri. Thank you, everybody.
Pleasure. I'm honored. Thank you.